The clippers roared to life like a chainsaw in a nightmare, and with each brutal pass, 13-year-old Imani Fields watched her carefully braided hair fall to the cold tile floor. Her voice cracked as she pleaded for it to stop, but Miss Clara Hensley stood stone-faced, arms crossed, nodding for the nurse to continue. What no one knew was that Imani's best friend was filming the entire thing, capturing not just a cruel haircut, but the spark that would ignite a national firestorm for justice. The buzz of clippers echoed like angry hornets in the sterile air of the Eastbridge Middle School nurse's office, each swipe tearing through the carefully braided hair of 13-year-old Imani Fields. Her chest tightened with every lock that hit the floor, exposing the raw, bald patches she'd spent years trying to hide. Miss Clara Hensley stood by, arms folded, her cold eyes locked on Imani with chilling satisfaction. The school nurse hesitated, visibly uncomfortable, but Clara's voice, sharp, commanding, cut through the silence. "Keep going. This is a clear violation of grooming standards. We will not make exceptions for disorder." That word. Disorder. It twisted in Imani's mind as tears streamed down her cheeks. Alopecia wasn't a disorder, it was a battle she'd quietly fought since she was 9. Her mother had submitted the proper documentation. Her braids weren't fashion. They were armor. But none of that mattered to Clara Hensley, a woman who had waited years for a moment like this. A woman who once wore a military uniform, whose disdain for disruption masked something far more insidious. From outside the office, Leah Porter, Imani's best friend and the only one who knew the full extent of her condition, stood frozen. Her hands trembled as she gripped her phone, secretly recording the scene through the sliver of the slightly ajar door. Her breath caught in her throat as she watched her friend shrink beneath the weight of humiliation. The nurse's hand wavered again, but Clara shot her a glare that snapped her back into motion. Imani's braids, once symbols of patience and care, lay discarded like refuse on the cold tile floor. "I can't do this," the nurse finally whispered, her voice thick with shame. She turned off the clippers and stepped back. But the damage had already been done. Clara didn't flinch. She turned on her heel and walked out, leaving Imani alone, shaking in the chair, surrounded by the remnants of her dignity. Leah tucked her phone into her hoodie pocket and sprinted down the hall, her breath shaky, her heart burning with rage. That night, the video exploded online. Leah had sent it to Imani's mom, Nicole Fields, who, after a moment of stunned silence, forwarded it to someone thousands of miles away. That someone was Sergeant Major Malcolm Fields, stationed at a remote U.S. Army base near Kuwait's northern border. He was debriefing from a tactical mission when he received the message. A video. From his wife. The subject line read, "They hurt her." Malcolm barely breathed as he tapped play. What he saw made his pulse thunder in his ears. His daughter, his baby girl, sobbing, her braids stripped away one by one as a woman he once commanded looked on with sick pleasure. Clara Hensley. The same woman he had disciplined and discharged for insubordination and racially charged misconduct years ago. She had resurfaced in civilian life, somehow hired by Eastbridge School District, and now she had used her new authority to target Imani. This wasn't discipline. This was revenge. A direct hit against him, delivered through the child he cherished most. Within the hour, Malcolm stood before his commanding officer, fists clenched at his sides, voice low but firm. "Sir, I'm requesting immediate emergency leave. A grave situation involving my daughter back in the States." The officer, a seasoned man who knew Malcolm never raised false alarms, studied him for a long second before nodding. "You're approved. Go get your girl." 20 hours later, after a sleepless flight filled with silent fury and boiling pain, Malcolm stepped off the transport plane at Fort Bragg. He didn't waste time. The next morning, he suited up, full dress uniform, polished metals gleaming, and drove straight to Eastbridge Middle School. As he exited the vehicle, heads turned. Students lingering by the flagpole fell silent. Teachers froze mid-conversation. No one had seen a presence like this walk through their halls before. His boots hit the linoleum with the quiet force of a coming storm. The halls parted like waves before him. Malcolm didn't flinch. He didn't look left or right. He moved with the deliberate power of a man who had seen battlefields and survived them, but who now faced the most personal war of all. He knew exactly where to go. The teacher's lounge. Clara Hensley would be there, sipping coffee, carrying herself with the smugness of someone who believed she'd gotten away with it. He didn't knock. He pushed the door open. Inside, Clara sat at a round table, a porcelain mug in her hand. Her gaze met his, and faltered. Her fingers twitched against the cup's handle. "Sergeant Major Fields," she said coolly, her voice artificially calm. "What a surprise." "Not a surprise," Malcolm replied, his voice low and controlled. "A reckoning." The other teachers, sensing danger, rose and quietly excused themselves. Within seconds, it was just the two of them. Clara set her cup down with a small clink. "I was enforcing school policy." "That child's hairstyle was medically exempt," Malcolm interrupted. His eyes were steel. "You knew that. You targeted her anyway. Just like you targeted my soldiers when I commanded you. Same tactics. Same hate." "This isn't the army," she snapped, the mask cracking. "I don't answer to you anymore." "No," he agreed, stepping closer. "But you will answer to the law. And to me, as a father." For the first time, Clara hesitated. Her breath caught. "You ruined my career," she muttered, her voice trembling with resentment. "You made sure I was discharged. I lost everything because of you." "You lost your career because you couldn't see past your own prejudice," Malcolm said quietly. "But now, you've dragged an innocent girl into your grudge match. My daughter." Her jaw clenched. "I did what I had to." "No," he said, voice rising just slightly, the gravity in it like thunder before the storm. "You did what you wanted. You humiliated a child who had done nothing to you. You shaved her hair because you couldn't shave away your own bitterness. You used your authority to commit cruelty, and now, I'm going to make sure everyone knows it." Clara stood abruptly, but Malcolm was already at the door. He paused only long enough to add, "The storm's coming, Clara. And you brought it on yourself." As he exited into the hallway, phones buzzed in lockers and pockets. The video had gone viral. News outlets were already calling. Hashtags were trending. Hashtag Justice for Imani. Hashtag End School Abuse. Malcolm's walk through the front doors was met with a sea of parents, many of them Black, Latino, Asian, holding handmade signs. "Protect our kids. We see you, Imani." The moment had already become a movement. But for Malcolm Fields, it wasn't about headlines or hashtags. It was about the look on his daughter's face that day. It was about the pain etched in her eyes. It was about restoring something no school board could quantify, her dignity. And this time, he would fight not with orders or weapons, but with truth, with law, and with the full weight of justice. Because no child should ever be stripped of their worth to settle an adult's vendetta. And no father should ever have to witness his daughter broken by a system meant to protect her. Clara Hensley had no idea what she'd started. But she was about to find out just how far a soldier, and a father, would go. The moment Sergeant Major Malcolm Fields stepped out of Eastbridge Middle School, the air outside felt heavier, charged with a collective electricity that rippled through the crowd gathered along the school's front steps. Parents with tear-streaked faces, local activists holding handmade signs, and students who barely understood the weight of what they had just witnessed all stood in stunned silence as Malcolm passed through them like a force of nature. But the calm didn't last long. That same evening, the video Leah had captured, the footage of Imani's braids being forcibly cut as she sobbed in the nurse's office, had begun to go viral. By midnight, it was everywhere. National news anchors debated it live on primetime. Twitter exploded with fury. Hashtags like hashtag Justice for Imani and hashtag Students Deserve Dignity began trending across the country. People weren't just reacting to the haircut, they were reacting to the system that let it happen. And Clara Hensley's face, caught in crystal-clear resolution standing stone-faced as a child was dehumanized, became the nation's newest symbol of institutional cruelty. Malcolm knew he needed help. Real help. Not just military resolve, but legal firepower. The next morning, he met with Celeste Ngoma, a brilliant civil rights attorney with a national reputation for dismantling systemic racism. She sat behind her desk, her expression unreadable as she watched the full clip on a secured tablet. Her fingers steepled beneath her chin. When it ended, she exhaled. "This wasn't policy," she said calmly. "This was punishment. Personal. Calculated." Malcolm nodded, jaw tight. "She used my daughter to settle a score. Clara served under me at Fort Polk. I filed the papers that got her discharged. She's carried that grudge for years." Celeste didn't blink. "Then we're going to make that history part of our case. This wasn't just abusive, it was strategic retaliation against your family. And we're going to take them down." At the same time, across town, investigative journalist Devin Harris was already several steps into his own investigation. Known for exposing school board corruption and racial bias in educational institutions, Devin had received a confidential tip about a slush fund labeled Special Circumstances Legal Reserve buried deep within Eastbridge Unified's financial records. He narrowed his eyes as he read through years of spreadsheet data and bank wire transfers, names of teachers, coded settlements, hush money payments masked as professional development disputes. It wasn't just Clara. There were others. The school board had a well-oiled machine to quietly buy silence, protect staff, and bury stories just like Imani's. Devin began writing. The story was growing fast. Meanwhile, back inside Eastbridge, a soft-spoken IT technician named Chris Mendoza stared at the blinking server screen in front of him. He'd heard whispers that school leadership planned to scrub the security footage from the nurse's office. He'd seen the file queued for deletion. And something inside him, perhaps the memory of his own sister once humiliated for wearing her hair natural to school, snapped into action. Chris made a backup. That evening, wearing a hoodie pulled over his head, he slipped into a downtown cafe where Devin Harris was waiting. "Watch this," Chris said, sliding his laptop across the table. What Devin saw made his stomach twist, a silent recording of Clara Hensley standing inches from Imani, nodding coldly as the nurse hesitated, then giving an authoritative order with a sharp downward jab of her hand. The expression on her face was unmistakable: glee. Vindication. Control. "They tried to delete this?" Devin asked, voice low. "Principal Russo ordered it scrubbed," Chris replied. "Said it would only fuel more hysteria." Devin looked at him. "You know sharing this could cost you your job." Chris nodded once. "It's worth it." The next morning, Devin dropped the bombshell: how Eastbridge protected racism. Inside the secret fund to silence students. His report, complete with screenshots, bank documents, and the leaked security video, ignited a firestorm across every major media outlet. Schools across the country came under renewed scrutiny. Parents demanded accountability. Protesters marched outside Eastbridge Unified's district headquarters. Malcolm and Nicole Fields, alongside Celeste, prepared to file a civil suit against Clara Hensley, Principal Edwin Russo, and the school district. When the court date arrived, the city courthouse overflowed. News vans lined the streets. Activists held signs with Imani's face on them. Inside, the air was electric. Imani, dressed in a simple blue dress and seated between her parents, trembled slightly but held her head high. Her testimony was powerful. "She didn't ask me anything," Imani told the court, voice soft but unwavering. "She just said I looked inappropriate. I told her I had a medical condition. That I had an exemption. She told me to stop making excuses." She paused, swallowing back tears. "Then she made me go to the nurse. Told her to cut off all my braids. I didn't want to, but they made me. I felt like I was being erased." The courtroom was silent except for the scribbles of reporters' pens. Celeste called former students to the stand, black girls and boys who had once sat in Clara's class. Each told chilling stories of being disciplined unfairly, singled out for dress code violations others weren't punished for, accused of being disruptive for raising their hands too often. Then came the final blow. Celeste entered Clara's military discharge papers into evidence. They confirmed it all: repeated misconduct, formal reprimands, multiple complaints of racially motivated behavior. And the signature at the bottom, Sergeant Major Malcolm Fields. Clara's face drained of color. She stammered on the witness stand, her composure unraveling. I was just doing my job." "No," Celeste said, her tone razor-sharp. "You were carrying out a vendetta. And now the entire country sees it." The jury didn't take long. They found Clara guilty of intentional emotional and physical harm, and Principal Edwin Russo guilty of negligence and complicity. The court awarded the Fields family $10 million in damages. The judge's gavel struck like a final declaration. Eastbridge Unified was no longer untouchable. As applause erupted inside the courtroom, 2 officers moved in and placed Clara under arrest for prior documented abuses during her time as a school administrator and misconduct suppressed by the slush fund. But the Fields' victory was barely celebrated before the next threat arrived. That night, as Nicole tucked Imani into bed, Malcolm found a small white envelope taped to their front door. Inside was a single sheet of paper. All caps. No signature. No return address. "Stop now or you'll regret it." Malcolm read it twice, then once more. He said nothing. He handed it to Nicole. Her eyes narrowed. "They're trying to scare us." "Let them try," Malcolm said, voice like steel. "We're not stopping." Over the next week, Malcolm began investigating on his own. He traced phone records, watched district meetings, cross-referenced public logs and campaign donations. What he found made his blood run cold: a network of school board members, James Pruitt, Valerie Simmons, and Robert Cale, colluding with local political figures to suppress lawsuits, reroute disciplinary complaints, and protect administrators like Clara. Devin Harris got the scoop, verified the evidence, and published it under the headline, "They Knew All Along: Political Power and the Eastbridge Cover-Up." It was the final crack in the dam. Massive resignations followed. District lawyers stepped down. The mayor of Eastbridge publicly condemned the conspiracy. And through it all, Imani watched, quiet but resolute. She had never wanted this spotlight, but she now understood her pain had a purpose far greater than one school. As Celeste looked over the growing mountain of evidence for a larger class action suit, she turned to Malcolm and Nicole. "This is no longer just about your daughter. It's about every child who's ever been silenced." Nicole nodded, her hand on Imani's shoulder. "Then we fight for them too." The fire that Clara Hensley started in that nurse's office was now a blaze sweeping through the entire system. And it was only just beginning. The storm that Clara Hensley set in motion had done more than expose the rot in Eastbridge. It had awakened a movement. Days after Devin Harris's expose brought down top district officials, the state's highest office took notice. In the marble halls of the state capitol, Governor Rachel DeMarco, known for her no-nonsense leadership and fierce advocacy for civil rights, held a press conference packed with journalists from every major outlet. She stood before the cameras with a stern gaze, her voice echoing with conviction. "What happened to Imani Fields," she said, "was not only unjust, it was a failure of the very system entrusted to protect our children. Today, I am introducing the Fields Student Dignity Act to ensure no student, in any public school in this state, will ever face this kind of abuse again. The act would require strict accountability for school administrators, mandatory cultural sensitivity training, and legally enforceable protections for students with medical or cultural exemptions." As the governor's words rippled across the nation, Nicole Fields sat in the family's living room, holding Imani's hand. Cameras were off. The microphones were gone. But in that quiet moment, the weight of what they had ignited began to settle. "They're listening," Nicole whispered, her eyes brimming. "Not just to us, but to every family who's stayed silent for too long." Days later, Nicole appeared on national television in a raw, powerful interview that instantly went viral. Sitting across from a top anchor on a special broadcast titled Voices Unheard, she shared their journey, not just the legal battle, but the pain, the threats, the quiet nights sitting beside her daughter when no words could reach her. "This isn't just about one haircut," she said firmly. "It's about a system that allowed a child to be violated without hesitation. And it's about how we, as parents, must rise and say, never again." Millions tuned in. Thousands of parents flooded social media with stories of their own children's mistreatment. Something shifted. It was no longer the Fields family's fight, it was America's. But perhaps the most transformative voice came not from Malcolm or Nicole, but from Imani herself. In the weeks that followed the trial, Imani rarely spoke publicly. Her emotions had been battered and stretched far beyond her years. But she found her refuge in the one place no one could interrupt, her art. Day after day, she painted in silence, pouring her anguish, her healing, and her quiet strength onto canvas. Bold colors. Jagged edges. Glowing light where darkness once loomed. One morning, Nicole walked into Imani's room and froze. Dozens of paintings surrounded her daughter, each a window into the emotional battlefield Imani had crossed. At the center of the collection stood a single canvas taller than the rest. It was Imani, bald and unbowed, standing defiantly as waves of black ink tried and failed to swallow her. Nicole's breath caught. "What is it called?" she asked softly. Imani turned, voice steady. "It's called Uncovered, Unbroken." That painting became the centerpiece of her first public exhibition, held at a downtown gallery under a program Imani herself had started called the Roots Project, an art therapy initiative for students who had experienced discrimination or trauma. With the help of her parents, Celeste, and local educators, Imani opened the studio doors to any student who needed a safe space to express their pain. The first weekend, there were 3 attendees. A month later, there were over 60. Word of the project spread fast. Students from across the region traveled to share their experiences and put brush to canvas. It wasn't therapy by textbook, it was healing by truth. Each week, Imani opened the sessions with the same words: "They may have tried to silence us, but here, we speak with color." The exhibit gained national attention, and soon, Imani received a letter with a gold seal, a formal invitation from the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., requesting to feature her work in a youth-led art and social justice showcase. Standing in the grand halls of America's most storied museum, Imani wore a simple white dress, her head uncovered, her smile quiet but unshaken. Around her, hundreds gathered to witness her journey. And at the center of the exhibit hung the same painting that once stood in her room, uncovered, unbroken. Beneath it, a plaque bore a single quote in bold letters: "You tried to silence me. But I turned my pain into power." The room was still. Not because of silence, but because everyone present knew they were witnessing a moment larger than any courtroom verdict. Imani, only 13, had transformed trauma into transformation. Not just for herself, but for a nation. Her courage, her grace, and her unwavering strength had reshaped laws, changed schools, and reignited a moral reckoning. Days later, another letter arrived. This one from the White House. Sergeant Major Malcolm Fields was being awarded the Presidential Citizens Medal for his role in championing justice for students and his tireless pursuit of truth. During the ceremony, the president pinned the medal on Malcolm's chest and spoke to the packed East Room with solemn pride. "Sergeant Major Fields, your commitment to justice has reminded us that one family's stand can spark a national awakening. Your courage is our country's strength." Malcolm's voice broke slightly as he addressed the crowd. "I accept this on behalf of every parent who's ever had to defend their child against a broken system. And most of all, for Imani. My daughter. My hero." But the final chapter wasn't written in a courtroom or under the museum lights. It came months later, when Imani stood before a crowd at a televised student leadership summit, flanked by young activists and educators, and chose to speak freely for the first time to the world. "There's something I've needed to say," she began, her voice clear but trembling. What Miss Hensley did to me hurt deeply. And for a long time, I thought the only way to move forward was to see her punished. But now I understand, justice is more than consequences. It's about healing. So today, I want to say something no one expects. The room went silent. Cameras zoomed in. Imani inhaled deeply. I forgive her. Not because what she did was okay, but because I will not carry her hate inside me. Forgiveness is how I take back my power. The crowd erupted in applause. Some wept. Others stood in reverent silence. And at the back of the room, Malcolm and Nicole held hands, tears in their eyes, knowing that their daughter had risen not just as a survivor, but as a leader. Under Eastbridge's new leadership, Principal Janelle Carter, a former art teacher and equity advocate, the school had begun to change. Dress code policies were revised. Cultural sensitivity workshops were made mandatory. And at the entrance of the school lobby now hung a framed print of Imani's painting, with a small brass plate reading, "To every student, your identity is your strength." Imani continued her work with the Roots Project, visiting schools, speaking to student groups, and helping others find their voice through art. She had become a living symbol of hope. A quiet revolution born not from shouting, but from resilience. As the sun set one cool October evening, Imani sat with her parents on the porch, sketchbook in hand, watching the sky turn amber. "Do you think it'll ever happen again?" she asked. Malcolm looked at her, then at Nicole, before answering. "Maybe," he said. "But if it does, the next Imani Fields won't have to fight alone. Because of you." Imani smiled, pencil moving again across the page. Her heart, once weighed down by injustice, now beat with a quiet fire. Her journey had begun in silence, but it ended in power. And in that, she had become unstoppable. In telling the story of Imani Fields, I was reminded that sometimes the smallest voices carry the most powerful truth. What began with a single cruel act, a young girl's braid stripped from her head in a school hallway, became the spark that exposed a broken system and inspired a movement for justice. But more than that, it became a story about courage, compassion, and the kind of healing that doesn't always come from punishment, but from purpose. Imani's journey teaches us that standing up doesn't always mean fighting back with louder words. Sometimes it means holding onto your dignity, finding strength in your identity, and choosing to rise above what was meant to break you. It also reminds us that injustice doesn't happen in isolation. It is often protected by systems, silenced by fear, and ignored by those in power. But the moment one person, just one, dares to speak the truth, change begins. To every parent watching this, never doubt the power of your voice in defending your child's worth. To every student, you have the right to be seen, heard, and respected, no matter what you look like or where you come from. And to every teacher or school leader, you have the responsibility to protect your students, not punish their difference. Policies should never become weapons. And discipline should never be used to mask prejudice. The Fields family didn't ask to become the face of a national movement. They simply refused to stay silent when silence was easier. Their courage shows us that we must hold institutions accountable, but we must also build communities that uplift, understand, and empower every child. And perhaps the most powerful message came not from a courtroom or a press conference, but from Imani herself, when she chose forgiveness. Not because what happened was forgivable, but because she refused to carry hate in her heart. That is strength. That is leadership. And that is what will shape a better future for generations to come. Thank you for watching US Daily Story. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of someone you love, please share it. Together, we can ensure that stories like Imani's aren't forgotten, and that the voices of the vulnerable are lifted higher than ever before. We appreciate every one of you who continues to stand for justice, truth, and compassion. From our hearts to yours, thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next story.